but here in our region, it is skyrocketing. Far too many good people are losing their lives, getting seriously injured. People being armed, carjacking left and right. I mean, it's out of control. Our party is urging for reforms to our criminal justice system that focuses just on violent offenders, violent people who are harming others. We have a package of legislation that would address that. The governor also has legislation. So far, I haven't heard much from the majority party on what their solutions are. There's nothing introduced that would address this problem. I'm hopeful that they share our concerns. They're hearing from people about it as well.
Well, one thing I expect to hear is just how well our state is doing. We've had now 5 years of Governor Hogan here, and of course we've had 4 years of President Trump, and the effect on the economy has just been phenomenal. Unemployment is at the all-time low in our country, and you're talking across all minorities, every group that you look at, unemployment is at an all-time low. So I'm expecting to hear a great talk about how Maryland, in particular, is doing very, very well. Our economy is doing well. We're moving forward. I'm expecting to hear some initiatives that he has. Transportation, of course, I live in the Washington County area, and Frederick, we're looking forward to seeing I-270 get expanded. I'm sure that he'll mention that and some other transportation projects.
I think, anytime you talk about the state of the state, you need to talk about Maryland as a whole. There's not one size fits all. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of those places like the hot spots. Baltimore City needs to be taken care of. Prince George's County, we need school construction desperately. We have to have that along with the Kerwin Commission. So those are the big things I'm looking for. And safety is always going to be a #1 priority for myself as well as the citizens of Prince George's County and the state of Maryland.
I'm hoping that the governor tells us how he intends to help with public safety and the violence that's going on in the city. And I know the GOP has really been focused on the city, and they're, trying to blame everything on the violence that's going on in the city. But, we've got crime all over our state in all of the jurisdictions. So I want to hear how he plans to work with Democrats and solving that issue. And, I'd also like to hear him talk about guns. I'm passionate about common sense gun safety legislation. So I'd love to hear him support background checks for everyone, seeing as how it polls high in both parties and continues to protect our citizens. So those are some of the things that I'm hoping that he discusses.
Back live at the Maryland State House, joined now by MPT's longtime legislative correspondent Charles Robinson. Charles, you've seen partial text of the governor's speech. What should we expect?
Well, I think you're going to get a lot of historical context. First of all, this is the first time that a woman's presiding over this body. Think about that. The other is that this is also the first time that neither Mike Bush or President Miller is not going to preside over this body. And the governor is going to make reference to that in the speech and the stuff that we've seen. I think the thing that everybody's going to be watching is how the governor is going to talk about the gridlock that's down in Washington, which is only 30 miles away from here, and how he wants to keep everything moving. The last part of that is, as the governor is coming in, as you can see, he is well liked in the state. The poll numbers bear that out. The last part of that is this. Look, this governor enjoys a monicum of, if you will, not just goodwill, but he tries to assert his will on the body. So expect to hear a lot about crime, which has been his signature issue.
Well, we just saw the legislature exert its will in overriding some Hogan vetoes last week. So to continue setting the stage here, on the rostrum are the new speaker, Adrienne Jones, as Charles mentioned, the first woman, first African-American speaker in state history, and Bill Ferguson, the new president of the state Senate. Major generational change there. Ferguson in his 30s, and that is Mike Miller, the governor patting on the back, still a member of the Senate from Southern Maryland.
Senate President Emeritus, that's what he's called.
Correct. As he continues his battle against cancer, Senator Miller has taken just one of the 47 seats in the Senate chamber and turned over the gavel to new President Bill Ferguson.
One of the things that's always interesting is the number of dignitaries that are surrounding. So in the background, you will see the Secretary of Education, several police chiefs, and on the other side, you will see a number of the county executives from around the state. And he will address them as well as others. So I guess we need to kind of listen in a little bit.
Sounds like a plan.
my fellow Marylanders, as we come together once again for this honored tradition, it is my distinct privilege to be the first Maryland governor to begin a State of the State address by saying, Madam Speaker, Mr. President, members of the General Assembly, and distinguished guests, it speaks to the greatness and diversity of our state and to the progress that we have made together that a young lawyer from Baltimore City, an African-American leader from Baltimore County, and a Republican businessman from Prince George's are all here before this General Assembly, having been chosen to lead our great state at the dawn of this new decade. This is possible because of those who came before us, selfless leaders like George Washington, who resigned as commander of the Continental Forces just a few steps down the hall in our old Senate chamber. Francis Scott Key, who, when the future of a fledgling nation was in doubt, penned the words that continue to inspire us today. And trailblazers like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, statues of whom we will be dedicating in our House chamber next week. Leaders who displayed such courage and sacrifice in the name of freedom. We have been fortunate to follow the example of influential leaders in our lifetime, too. Last year, we lost Speaker Mike Bush, who dedicated the greater part of his life in service to our state and who left Maryland a better place than he found it. And Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr., who, after serving as Senate President longer than anyone in American history, is now beginning his 50th year of public service as Senate President Emeritus. During his recent battles, Mike Miller has shown us all the true meaning of courage and determination. As we gather here once again in this historic place to take the first steps of this new decade, we do so with optimism and confidence in our collective ability to continue changing Maryland for the better. Sadly, the country that we all love is increasingly divided by toxic politics. But here in Maryland, we have spent the past 5 years working together to tackle our common problems by accepting our shared responsibility to solve them. 5 years ago, during my first inaugural address, I said that the politics that have divided our nation need not divide our state. And I asked all Marylanders to seek that middle ground where we could all stand together. And while Washington seems to be more bitterly divided than ever, here in Maryland, we have faced our challenges with civility and moderation. We have continued to put the people's priorities ahead of partisan politics, and we work together to achieve real bipartisan common sense solutions that worked for the people we serve. As a result, I am pleased to report that the state of our state has never been stronger. The people of Maryland, regardless of their party affiliation, are overwhelmingly pleased with the job that we have been doing. Maryland has indeed been setting a shining example for the rest of America. And as we embrace the promise of this new decade, we have a renewed opportunity to meet the challenges that lie ahead by continuing on that path and by being accountable to the people who sent us here. 5 years ago, I pledged to put more people to work, to grow the private sector, and to turn Maryland's economy around. And we have done exactly what we said we were going to do. More businesses are now open, and more people are working than ever before in the history of our state. We ushered in the largest decline in unemployment ever recorded and had one of the greatest economic turnarounds in America. But there is one part of our economy which I can't fix without your help. Nearly every day, I hear from folks who say, I love the state of Maryland. I've spent my whole life here, and I don't want to leave my kids and grandkids, but I just can't afford to stay here on a fixed income. We are losing many of our best citizens, people who have contributed so much and still have so much more to offer, are moving to other states for one reason, and that's our state's sky-high retirement taxes. They tell me that Maryland's retirement taxes are simply too high and that they're moving to Delaware or Florida, the Carolinas, or any other state where they don't take so much out of their retirement checks. So we propose the Retirement Tax Reduction Act of 2020, which will provide more than $1 billion in tax relief over 5 years. Under this plan, retirees making $50,000 or less who are often forced to make tough choices every single day just to make ends meet will pay no state income tax whatsoever. And all retirees who are earning less than $100,000 will see a tax reduction of no less than 50% and up to 100%. This is the largest tax reduction in Maryland in more than 2 decades. It will provide tax relief for more than 230,000 Marylanders, and it will keep tens of thousands of Maryland retirees from fleeing our state. We have some of the best and most highly funded schools in America, and we have provided record funding 6 years in a row, committing nearly $40 billion to K through 12 education. We enacted the Casino Lockbox Initiative, which will require the investment of an additional $4.4 billion more into our local schools for critical things like increasing teacher salaries, pre-K expansion, extended academic programming for at-risk students, and innovative career technology programs. And we invested $350 million more in our FY 2021 budget to fully fund the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission without raising taxes. More than 75% of our entire capital budget goes to education. No governor in the history of this state has ever invested more in education. And you can help us build on that historic investment by passing our Building Opportunity Act of 2020 that will provide a record $3.9 billion in funding, the largest investment ever in school construction, which will enable us to fulfill every single request from every single jurisdiction in the state for new school construction and for upgrades and repairs to aging schools. I stand here today, ready and willing to continue working alongside you to ensure that every single child in our state has access to a great education, regardless of what neighborhood they happen to grow up in. But instead of continuing to simply debate how much more we should spend, let's have productive discussions about how we can hold local school systems accountable for the billions of state tax dollars we are already investing. And let's make sure that those dollars are getting into the classrooms where they belong. Our bipartisan efforts should have one simple goal, and that is achieving better results for Maryland's children. We have taken a balanced and inclusive approach to infrastructure, investing $14 billion in transit, the most ever, and beginning construction on the Purple Line, which is the largest P3 transit project in North America. We proposed and negotiated a regional solution to address WMATA's $500 million a year shortfall in order to save the metro system. After decades of discussion, we negotiated a deal to finally move forward on the Howard Street Tunnel, which will break a major East Coast rail transport bottleneck, allowing for double-stacked trains, which will dramatically increase production at the Port of Baltimore and create thousands and thousands of Maryland jobs. We have moved forward on nearly all of the highest priority transportation projects in every single jurisdiction all across our state. Over 800 projects totaling $9 billion in roads and bridges are currently under construction. We advanced a transformative regional interstate traffic relief plan, which will finally begin to address the second worst traffic congestion in America and solve what has been the #1 problem in the region for decades. And as chairman of the nation's governors, I'm leading a national initiative focused on rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure. We pushed for landmark legislation which cemented our position as a national and international leader in combating greenhouse gas emissions, and implemented clean air standards, which are stronger than 48 other states, and nearly twice as strong as the Paris Accord recommendations. When it comes to the Chesapeake Bay, we committed $6 billion, the most ever in history, to clean up the bay. And as chairman of the 6-state regional commission, the Chesapeake Executive Council, I stood up and led the fight to protect and restore federal funding for the Chesapeake Bay. And we're pushing for action to hold the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the EPA accountable for the pollution coming down the Susquehanna River, over the Conowingo Dam, and into the bay. Maryland has made historic progress in bay restoration, but we cannot and should not have to go it alone. I intend to keep pushing our upstream neighbors and federal partners to ensure that they are doing their fair share to protect this national treasure. To ensure that public officials are worthy of the trust that the people have placed in them, we introduced the Ethics and Accountability in Government Act to strengthen and toughen state ethics laws. This is an important effort to help restore the public's trust and to bring further transparency and accountability to Annapolis. We cannot allow the unethical behavior of a few to tarnish the goodwill of the many in our state capital. And while Maryland is leading the way and setting an example in so many ways, there is one area where we continue to be on the wrong side of history. Our state has the unfortunate distinction of having the most gerrymandered districts in America. For 5 years in a row, we have introduced nonpartisan redistricting reform, and yet year after year, this body has refused to even debate the legislation. We serve in the nation's oldest state house that once served as the first capital of the United States after the Revolutionary War. American democracy literally began right here in this very place. And yet, when it comes to free and fair elections, we are failing to live up to that proud legacy. This General Assembly should not continue to ignore the overwhelming majority of our citizens. In this highly partisan time in America, you have a chance to do the right thing, to strike a win for democracy, fairness, and decency by finally, after 5 years, bringing the nonpartisan redistricting bill to the floor of this body for an up or down vote. Now, every issue that I've talked about here today, and all of the bills that you will be considering over the next 61 days, are important and worthy of debate and discussion, but none of them are as important as addressing the out-of-control violent crime, the shootings and murders that are destroying Baltimore City. In October, a 2-year-old boy was riding in the car with his family on a Saturday morning when he was shot in the stomach. Last month, a 73-year-old grandmother was shot and killed after being caught in gang crossfire near the apartment complex where she lived. 12 people were recently shot and 5 people killed in just one night. More than 1,000 people were shot on the streets of Baltimore City last year. 348 people were killed. Another 60 people have been shot, and 23 people have been killed just in the 29 days since this legislative session began. One concerned Baltimore City resident recently said of the violence, "I don't know if prayers help, but we need prayers." Now, I'm a big believer in the power of prayer. And yes, we do need prayers, but prayers are not enough. We also are going to need you to take action to get these shooters off our streets. If you do not consider any other legislation, and if you accomplish nothing else in the next 61 days, pass the Violent Firearm Offenders Act of 2020. This increases penalties for those who use guns to commit violent crimes, toughens penalties for those who possess stolen firearms and guns with obliterated serial numbers, and those who use, possess, or supply illegal guns to violent criminals, and passed the Witness Intimidation Prevention Act, which toughens penalties for those who intimidate and threaten witnesses, and the Judicial Transparency Act, because the public has a right to know about the sentences that judges are giving to the most violent offenders. We have been fighting to bring more transparency and accountability to the executive branch and the legislative branch. There's no reason why the judicial branch can't be held accountable as well. Now, people are being shot every single day in Baltimore City. This is an urgent crisis, and we have an obligation to do something about it right now. There can be no more excuses, no more delays. The time has come for Baltimore City to finally take back its streets and communities once and for all. And they simply cannot do it without decisive action from this General Assembly. Now, I recently had the chance to visit Umar Boxing in West Baltimore, where Hall of Fame boxer Marvin McDowell trains and mentors local kids. And he's not just teaching them boxing skills and discipline, he's also teaching them life skills and giving them hope. His motto is, "No hooks before books." And I met just as many kids who were there studying as there were boxing. Marvin is fighting every day to save young people and the city that he loves. Marvin said, "If everybody had the same attitude I had of hope, then that would be a change." We're honored to have Marvin McDowell here with us this afternoon. Marvin, thank you so much. Thank you for making a difference. Marvin, thank you for making a difference. And Marvin is absolutely right. If we could all start from a place of hope and optimism, and if we could all find the will and the determination to come together to take on even the most daunting challenges, then we can bring about change in Baltimore City, and we will continue to change Maryland for the better. Ladies and gentlemen, our nation appears hopelessly and bitterly divided. Just 30 miles down the road in Washington, both parties seem to be consumed with partisanship and dysfunction. But as I look back on all that we have been through and all the progress that we have made together here in Maryland over these last 5 years, my experiences do not burden me with dread. They fill me with hope. I believe that in spite of all that divides us in America today, there is far more that unites us. And as America searches for healing and a path forward, let them look to us. Because from the very founding of our nation, Maryland has always been guided by our commitment to fairness and justice, and by a conviction that no problem faces us, that hard work, honesty, and courage cannot solve if we work together. And so today, with confidence in the inherent wisdom and good judgment of the people of Maryland and the people of our nation, I ask that you, my partners in this legislature, on both sides of the aisle, I ask you to continue forward with me on this path. Let us continue to deliver real results for the people who put their trust in us. Let us keep putting the people's priorities before partisan interests. Let's keep changing Maryland for the better and continue setting an example for the rest of the nation. Thank you. May God bless the great state of Maryland and the United States of America.
Governor Larry Hogan delivering his 6th State of the State address. The governor contrasting bipartisan aspects of Maryland government with partisan tensions in Washington. Now with the Democratic view of the state of our state, Senator Melony Griffith, who is the Senate President pro tem.
The House minority.
Good afternoon. I'm Melony Griffith, Senator from District 25 in Prince George's County, and the President Pro Tem of the Maryland Senate. I'm a social worker by training and the proud mother of 2 sons, both of whom, like me, have chosen to start their adult life in Maryland. Thank you to Maryland Public Television for this opportunity. The Senate and House Democratic caucuses represent Marylanders from all over our state. Our great state is made up of individuals and families from cities and counties, rural, urban, and suburban areas. Each of our districts has wonderful assets, and each district also has unique challenges and issues. We'll spend this session working together to address the issues Marylanders face, no matter their district, zip code, race, gender, or income level. Our members working with our new leadership, Senate President Bill Ferguson and House Speaker Adrian Jones, as well as new committee and party leadership, are committed to delivering the results Marylanders deserve. We thank the governor for his willingness to work with the General Assembly, and we feel confident that we have many areas we can work together on for the good of our state. A few weeks ago, the governor introduced a $48 billion budget. While a great deal of work this session will be focused on adopting a balanced budget that's responsible to the challenges, we'll also have a number of key policy areas that will advance this session. Being safe is a priority for each one of us, and we look forward to working with the administration and local delegations to ensure that the public not just feels safer, but is safer. Yesterday, Democratic leadership announced a crime package that focuses on real accountability, providing smarter resources to both fight crime and its root causes, and ensuring that there are fewer illegal guns by closing loopholes and increasing penalties. We know there's no single solution to this complex issue, but there are steps that we can take to implement thoughtful and comprehensive approaches to addressing crime. We are also continuing our important work in the areas of education and workforce development. For Maryland businesses to be competitive, we need to ensure that they have access to a well-trained workforce. 2/3 of the jobs in Maryland require a degree or certification, but only about 30% of Marylanders are receiving these degrees and certifications that they need. By preparing our students to become that well-trained workforce, we can advertise ourselves as being open for business. In Maryland, we understand that every child must have equal access to a high-quality education. We must make investments in our classrooms and in our buildings. In part, we will do this by funding over $2.4 billion in school construction and repairs throughout the state. These critical projects will not only create jobs, but will also ensure that school facilities aren't barriers to teaching and learning. At the same time, we need to make long-term investments in our students and our teachers. We also need to adopt research and evidence-based best practices like universal pre-K and competitive teacher salaries to achieve the outcomes that ensure that every young person in Maryland can get the right skills to equip them for a higher quality of life and a promising future. As chair of the Health and Human Services Subcommittee, I know that we need to make more health care affordable and accessible. We'll continue to fight to increase coverage and protect the gains that we've made in behavioral health, mental health, and substance abuse issues in our state. We can't protect health care without addressing the ongoing issues of climate change and the health effects of a polluted environment, and we're committed to addressing climate change and increasing the health of the Chesapeake Bay. Finally, we've all heard recent troubling reports regarding corruption throughout many levels of government. While the headlines of corruption have been distressing, the tough ethics laws that we've passed in a bipartisan fashion are working. Like many of you, we're concerned about the reports of issues that are being raised. This session, the Senate has already passed additional ethics legislation, and we'll continue to work with the governor on his ethics package. Friends, our work is made better with your input. We encourage you to reach out to your senator and delegates so that we know your opinions and how we can help. Thank you.
And Charles and I are joined now by Harford County Executive Barry Glassman and State Senator Jim Rosapepe. Let's start with your basic reaction to the speech. What do you like? What maybe didn't you like?
Well, he clearly was trying to distinguish himself from President Trump. So he was friendly, he was outreaching, he was trying to be bipartisan, and that's great.
He shook hands with everybody.
He shook hands with everybody, exactly. I didn't see anybody tearing up his speech. I think we accepted the spirit of it. But the reality is that we have a serious crime problem in this state that we had under control until he became governor. When Governor O'Malley was governor, he put state police, state corrections, state parole, putting the bad guys in jail. Once Governor Hogan got elected, it got out of control. So we're glad to say that he's getting back interested in working with us to try to control crime.
Explain that. How did Governor Hogan, in your view, cause the increase in crime?
He pulled out the commitment that under Governor O'Malley had brought the state institutions, the state police, state corrections, state parole and probation, targeting the bad guys. A third of the people who are committing these crimes and murders in Baltimore are under parole and probation under Governor Hogan's administration. So we're glad if he wants to come back to the table. We have a crime plan that we're very enthusiastic about that we think will bring people back together. It'll get crime down. We need Governor Hogan to work with us. So I was glad they expressed some interest in doing that.
Lastly, was there anything in his crime plan that you'd be okay with?
I wasn't clear what it was. I think he's against crime, which is terrific. So that's why we want to sit down and work together. We have a very detailed crime plan, bringing everybody together, dealing with guns, dealing with the bad guys, and also helping the ex-offenders who aren't bad guys so they get jobs so they don't go back to a life of crime. So we work with that. It'll be great.
Senator Rosapepe, we appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So let's talk to you, County Executive Glassman. First and foremost, your county has been booming. And I know you heard some things in there that you liked. Let's talk about what you heard that you liked.
Well, I think for Harford County and a lot of suburban counties, the governor's commitment to school construction, there is a House bill and the governor's bill, but the good thing is that both those bills will provide close to $4 billion of school construction and renovation money for all of Maryland's counties. So it benefits Baltimore County, Harford County, and that is good. So I think it gets us on a road over the next 10 to 20 years that every school has air conditioning, heating, and is modern and up to date throughout every zip code in the state.
I know you're not immune from crime up in Harford County. What do you think your jurisdiction needs that it doesn't have right now as far as crime fighting?
I would say that to give my sheriff, Jeff Gaylor, some credit, Harford County did have a 1% decline in crime last year. So, but we do border Baltimore City, close to I-95, and so we are constantly interested in more support for drug addiction, the drug trade. I-95 is a major corridor for heroin, now cocaine, mixed with carfentanil and all the bad stuff. So we continue to ask for more support there. I would note that, just to respond a little bit to Senator Rosapepe, that I think it's a stretch to blame the governor for this increase in violence in Baltimore City. Really, this has been going on 3 or 4 years, and the governor's program really just calls for stiffer sentences for these folks that are committing violence with guns. And we need to get them off the street with tougher sentences, and I support the federal law to send them away out of state, and I think that's the only way we're going to really make a difference.
Glassman, appreciate you here. Now let's go back to Jeff, who has another guest.
Charles, thank you, sir. Johnny Olszewski is the new county executive in Baltimore County. Not all that new, at least a year has gone by, right?
A year in at this point, yeah.
Your top priorities right now and what you heard from the governor that connects with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of alignment. My 2 top priorities this year are education and public safety. I think both the school buildings and giving our children and our teachers top-notch learning environments. There's pretty broad consensus. It's bipartisan down here on whether it's the governor's proposal or the legislature's Built to Learn Act. It's something we were proud to lead on last year. In terms of the operational dollars, it's clear that we need more investment to pay our teachers more, hire more support personnel. So hopefully we can all come to the table and find a way to get it done, even if we agree on the mechanisms. I actually believe in more accountability in how we spend the dollars, but we also need to find a way to do more.
What's the local impact on the education funding formula? 2/3 of the money would come from the state, but a third from local governments, and the impact on specific counties was all over the map.
Yeah.
What would it mean for Baltimore County?
So for Baltimore County, it'd be $88 million over the 10-year plan as proposed by the commission, and I think that's a reflection that we've invested so much, especially recently. So just in this current budget year, we went $35 million above maintenance of effort, which is one of the largest increases in our county's history. We hired 100 more teachers, 60 more support personnel, and gave our teachers raises. So we're already starting down that path, and we had a conversation. People were excited about it. It was a budget that was bipartisan. It was 6-1. Republicans, Democrats coming together to find a way to do that. On public safety is the other issue. We've got a new plan with our new police chief, more real-time crime fighting, more proactive and predictive, and then just having the resources. So I'm encouraged that it's on the agenda, and also recognizing that the downstream investments, so the education, the youth works, all those things matter too.
You've been around the General Assembly for a long time. You were telling me that it feels a little different this year, new leadership in the House and Senate.
Yeah, new leadership, new approaches. I mean, there's a great history and legacy of what both Mike Bush and Mike Miller had meant for this institution. I mean, they are institutions in and of themselves, but to see, the first woman and the first African-American speaker, and Adrienne Jones, we're so proud of her and the work she's doing, and a new Senate president. There's
Baltimore County delegate.
Baltimore County delegate too. We're very proud of our delegate and our speaker, but she's taken a great statewide approach, and we're just excited to be part of the conversation and be down here.
John Olszewski, Baltimore County Executive, thanks for the time.
Always my pleasure.
We appreciate it. We're going to send it over to Charles and Calvin Ball.
Well, thanks a whole lot, Jeff. I'm here with the county executive from Howard County, Calvin Ball. County executive, there were a lot of things in this speech. Talk to me what you heard is in it for Howard County, if you will.
Well, I definitely agree with the governor's call for unity and us moving forward. I think the focus on the environment, looking at issues like protecting our bay, is something that is important to Howard County. I think making sure that we have sufficient funding for school construction and creating an environment where every teacher, every educator, every student has the best place to teach and learn. Those are things we can come together on.
I know you just went through a bruising campaign with reconfiguration of schools out there. How is that being received out there, if you will? Because that was an initiative of yours.
So it was an initiative of mine. However, the Board of Education and the school system look at redistricting every so often. And when we have a school system where there are significant capacity issues, some nearing 130, 140% capacity, some down as low as 80%, we need to have a community conversation about redistricting.
I know that Howard County is one of those counties in this state that has high achievers academically, and you also bring a lot of new business to this state. Talk about what you think this body needs to give to you to keep that going.
So I think as we're looking into the future, some of our biggest challenges is when it comes to transportation. We need to make sure that people can get to where they need to go for jobs and the quality of life. Investing in our educational system, creating those opportunities for those emerging entrepreneurs, those small businesses, those living wage jobs, and those are things that I think we can partner with at the state and the local level on.
Last but not least, you've got a racetrack down in Laurel. This legislature wants to give some money to help Laurel and Pimlico out. Is that going to be good for Howard County?
Well, I think we're evaluating it. At this moment, we're looking at the impact of not only Howard County, but throughout Anne Arundel, Baltimore City, and I know they're having a lot of conversations about that.
Appreciate it. County Executive Calvin Ball from Howard County. Jeff?
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you.
Likewise, we'll continue our coverage from Annapolis right after this.
Can you tell us what you know?
Turning back now to the race for the White House.
The State Board of Elections voted Thursday to set up a new election.
It must be a very emotional day.
The world changed in the blink of an eye.
Children are at the heart of this story.
Drop your phone and just be in the moment.
You guys ready?
It's a thrill to see images of a new world for the first time.
I want to look back and say I learned something. That is where transformation happens.
I see people cry on this show, and I'm like, what y'all doing, man?
Out of the water came this giant thing.
That's incredible.
I feel it in my bones.
It's so dope. It's amazing.
They hear that song and they're like, that's my story.
I feel it in my bones.
I have chills.
All of the joys, all of the sorrows.
This is where it comes from.
The rest is history.
I feel it in my bones.
Our job is the truth.
I'm a journalist.
My destiny is to rule this country.
I will not run away.
Yes, Mom.
It's very exciting.
Lord, I'm getting tired of being so lonely. I've got the fire inside that burns more than it lights.
Sir, are you a gentleman? How dare he?
I'm a strong woman and I've got my own. I'm in control. I need somebody to
I refuse to be tamed. Kiss me. It's terribly hot, isn't it? No?
Please be mine again.
No.
And we're joined now by former Lieutenant Governor Michael Steele, along with Maryland's lone Republican congressman, which is part of your title, I believe, Andy Harris. Congressman, if I could start with you, you served in the legislature here. Last night you were in Washington, D.C. for the State of the Union. Compare and contrast the two events.
Well, obviously the State of the Union is on a grander scale, but both the governor and the president had some common themes. They both spoke about, I think, quite truthfully about how the economy in the nation and in the state have benefited. They spoke about security a little different. The governor talking about local security, the president talking about national, international security. But it's just a different atmosphere. I mean, Washington is a more partisan atmosphere. We're coming off a partisan impeachment. It's going to end today. Thank goodness. Let's move on to the work of the people, as the governor suggested we do here in Maryland.
And Mr. Steele, you've been in state government for a long time. You've been on the national scene. Are we at a high water mark in D.C. when it comes to partisan tensions?
Yeah, I think the tensions are pretty rife right now. I think the exchange between the president and the speaker last night was unbecoming on both their parts, and it's frustrating when you're looking at leadership for leadership and they're sort of tussling with each other. I think what Governor Governor Hogan said today in striking a theme let's be the model for the country here in Maryland of working together, creating good legislation on behalf of the people is something I know Andy tries to take to D.C. from his time here in Washington. He's butting heads, trying to get folks to cross the aisle to work on legislation with him. And so that's the challenge of the times that we have right now.
Gentlemen, I just want to, what can you bring from Maryland that would help the rest of the nation to understand why we get along so well, if you will? I don't know if it always happens like that. Senator Harris, you want to start?
You know, it's hard to say. Look, the stakes are just so much higher in Washington in general. I mean, we're talking about, the world. We're talking about global economies, things like that. And I think when the stakes get higher, the emotions get more charged. And again, obviously, this whole impeachment deal over the past 3 months has driven a huge wedge. I think it's poisoned the well for the rest of the year. And I think the average American looks at that and goes, yeah, they kind of understand that, but let's get beyond it as soon as we can.
Lieutenant Governor, one of the things is this governor enjoys some of the highest popularity of any governor in the United States.
Yes.
How's he doing it?
He's doing it because he starts by listening to what people out there are saying, what's important to them. And then he follows that up by literally talking to the leaders on the other side of the aisle, if you will, and trying to figure out a way to craft the legislation necessary to address those issues. He spends times in the neighborhoods. His conversation about what's going on in Baltimore, dealing with the opioid and fentanyl issue, the drug issue across the state, looking at creating a pathway so that voters have full and unfettered access to the ballot box by looking at reforms necessary, again, in line with what the people of Maryland want. And I think you've seen that from the beginning of his administration. He's been consistent in that, and he's brought people along, and there's been some resistance both inside his own party as well as on the other side. But he's navigated those waters, not by name calling, not by throwing stones, not by, creating tensions unnecessarily, but actually trying to figure out a way forward.
Okay, real quick. Governor's in his last term. What does he do after this? Congressman Harris.
Well, maybe he brings some of that logic to Washington.
Well put, sir.
Is he going to run for another office?
Pardon me? Is the governor going to run?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, he has options. He's the chairman of the National Governors Association right now, so he's got a national platform.
Us with the whole president thing.
But he's got a national platform in which he can bring some of the good examples of what's happened here in Maryland to the national stage. He's got friends in Washington like Andy who can reinforce that messaging. So I think it's a good thing.
Gentlemen, thank you so very much. Let's go back to Jeff.
Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate it. I'll take one of those and I'll hand it to Howard County Delegate Terry Hill.
Good to see you. How's it going? You having fun yet?
It's a very social place. Delegate, thanks for the time. Tell us what you thought of the governor's speech, what you heard that you liked, and maybe what you wish you had heard.
Well, I guess what really struck me is when the governor talked about how Marylanders are overwhelmingly pleased with how we're doing. And I thought about this past week when we finally unveiled what was happening with our children in foster care, how they're being dumped into hospitals because we don't have the adequate supports for that, and they're also being dumped in mental hospitals. And so when I listen to that, I wonder if Marylanders are really pleased with how we're doing. When I think about our Transportation Trust Fund and how it is being depleted as more transportation projects are going forward because of the tolls that were lowered. So I'm concerned that we are not meeting our responsibilities and we're going to pay for it. And so when the governor talks about violence in the city, which is clearly of critical importance to every Marylander, I wonder when we're leaving kids in mental institutions without mental problems and in emergency rooms for weeks and weeks at a time, can we really expect them not to respond in some violent way in 10 or 5 years? So I think that we're not doing the upstream things that we need to do to prevent these problems. And so I'm very concerned that the governor, a nice man, a good man, I don't think he gets it. And I think he's setting us up for more problems down the road.
Just in a sentence or two, how would you prioritize when there are all those needs? There's also the planned big spend on Kerwin, a big spend to rebuild Pimlico. What comes first for you?
I think it's not a matter of what comes first. I think what I have to question and understand that I you know, I'm an aging person myself, so I completely hear from my constituents and understand their need for retirees to get some tax breaks, but I want us to be responsible. And so I think that we have to first admit that we're not meeting our needs.
Delegate Terry Hill, appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will have more coverage of the governor's State of the State message on State Circle this Friday at 7. For Charles Robinson and all of us at MPT, thanks for watching. Have a good day.